Here is my Week 8 Adobe Express video on Introduction to Cubism. We first looked at a portrait of Gertrude Stein, which was painted in 1906. She was a collector, poet, and writer who asked Picasso to paint her portrait. She did 90 sittings with Picasso, and what was unique about her face was Picasso scraped away what he had done on the face and came back to it at a later time when Stein was not in front of him, and people thought the portrait looked nothing like her. So Picasso said everyone thinks she looks nothing like her portrait, but never mind, in the end she will manage to look just like it. This supports the idea that the portrait will live on and will be the way she is remembered. Picasso managed to change the function of the portrait because the face of the portrait looks more like an ancient Iberian sculpture that Picasso was studying at the time. This changed the portrait's function from a likeness to more represent presence. Picasso used aspects of portraits from Jean Auguste, Dominique Ingres, and Paul Cézanne, which were three previous paintings, to help him create Stein's portrait. And this supports the idea that we have been discussing, that art is a reflection of what came before it. The mask-like face was shown in this photo, and it was mask-like because of the disjunction between the eyes and the flatness of the plane of her face, which made it seem like a mask. Gertrude Stein felt that this was the truest portrait that had ever been made of her. Despite a likeness, she felt that it truly represented her. The style from last week, that is illusionism, is all about perspective. The background of the portrait is sketchy and hard to make out, which allows for expansion of new forms of expression in art to be shown. The major Cubism influence stems from the traditional representation and allows for new forms of shapes and a sense of flatness to the objects in the art pieces. The next painting is called the Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And the subject was Carrera d'Avignon, which refers to a street in Barcelona associated with prostitution. It focuses on women who are available to the male viewer. This painting reflects back on to the Degas and Manet of his painting of Olympia, and even the Venetian Renaissance on paintings by Titan. This painting could reflect the 500 years of European painting that started during the Renaissance, but it could also be seen as the foundation that Cubism was built on. It represents a radical break that points to the future. Two male figures that the women were originally looking at were removed from the painting. In the final portrait, the woman's gaze is directed at the viewer. The original sketches differ because the original sketches included males that the women were gazing upon. Not including the original objects drew more attention to the central figure, which made the painting raw. A memento mori is a word to represent death in art history. It related to this painting due to the original inclusion of the male medical student carrying a skull. So the faces of the women are connected to the portrayals of African masks that Picasso was looking at the time. The left figure is a representation of an archaic figure going back to ancient Spain and Iberian art. There is a total agglomeration of styles. Cubism is a deconstruction of three-dimensional form, shattering the form and placing fragments back onto a two-dimensional surface, leading viewers to put their view on the central figure. The viewpoints allow the viewer to see the central figure as if we were looking across from it, as well as looking down at it. Other artists were horrified by this painting because of its rawness and ugliness. Picasso was looking at African masks to represent danger and to represent France's colonialism, because France had a large colonial possession of Africa at the time. Analytic cubism is the idea of taking something apart and analyzing each disassembled part. The further you stand back from the painting, the more you can see a figure of a man. You can identify the head, shoulders, and elbows. Picasso felt that the modern world was one that felt ruptured and that the painting was an illusion that represented three-dimensional forms of space. In Picasso's painting, you are able to see the diagonals, horizontals, and vertical lines in black. This was different than those of the time period before it because those forms supposed a single viewer fixed in front of the art at one viewpoint. Cezanne said that if he moves around the thing that he is painting instead of looking at it from one point in space and time. Picasso built upon Cezanne's confrontation of linear perspective because he took the idea that one's view is constantly changing and looks at the idea of viewing his piece from multiple perspectives over time. The things that generally draw one into a painting of a person were not presented in this work. Picasso was more interested in the structural logic of the language he was inventing. The title of the painting, which is The Guitarist, is critical to understanding the painting because without it, it would be difficult to locate the man and the guitar.